Okay, I think we got it.
Okay. With the exception of Commissioners Cabe and Wickwire, who are absent and excused, and no non-agenda public comments, no minutes to approve, no new business, no public hearing this evening. Tonight's going to be a study session, the continued review of the housing strategy update with our expert panel here. And with that, I will hand it over to David Boyd with Community Development.
And I just wanted to go over a couple of logistics. So we don't have enough microphones for everybody, so please share those, and you can shift them around as needed. There are some potential technical glitches occasionally. If I was just told if 7 microphones get turned on at a time, the first one gets shut off. So we'll try to work our way through that. But you press the button in the middle at the bottom to turn on your microphone, and the red lights will come on. And so if the red lights are not on, turn on your microphone so that it will. This is being telecast, and so we want to make sure that everybody can be heard. So with that, this is the 5th study session on our housing strategy update. The lion's share of the work is being done by our colleagues at Arch. Arthur Sullivan and Mike Stanger are here representing Arch. And instead of introducing all of the panel members, I assume we're gonna do some self-introductions. So I'll just defer to that and turn it over to Arthur if you have any introductory comments you want to make.
I will just be very brief. I just appreciate all of you coming tonight. Our intent here is the commissioners did ask for different ways of hearing different perspectives in the community. So they're doing some focus groups with different profiles of people in the community. And the purpose of tonight, though, is to have an extended conversation where they get to hear from housing practitioners. And so we have a variety of different practitioners here, and we wanted to give you all a chance to make some introductory comments and things like that. But at that point, you've seen the matrix. We sent you that. That is sort of the working document that the group is working through. And while Arch and sometimes this is sometimes seen as a housing affordability is a key issue, I think the key thing to keep in mind, this is an overall housing strategy for the community. So this commission is particularly interested in the wide range of types of issues related to housing and different needs in the community, not just from an affordability point of view, but the market production of housing and what can make that work better and everything like that. And I think this is a good cross-section of different perspectives of practitioners in the community. And so just making sure it emphasizes this is about a whole range of, yes, affordability is one piece, but there's definitely other issues related to getting development to occur, and the kind of things the community needs are and things along those lines to make this a strong residential community going into the future. So I think that's just basic overview, but mostly this is a chance for the two groups and the commissioners. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions for you. They've been thinking about this for a couple months, and so this is now their chance to really start delving into specific ideas, and you'll help launch them in that effort.
And I'll just add that we did want to have a broad range of folks involved in affordable housing, providing affordable housing as well as market rate housing, and not just from the development community, but from the design community and from the management end of that. So with that, I'll just let the panel introduce themselves, starting to my right here.
Thank you. My name is Fred Safstrom. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Housing Hope. We operate throughout Snohomish County. We were formed 30 years ago, and we have developed 40 different development projects over that period of time. So thanks for the invitation.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Hollenberry. I'm Vice President for Land Entitlement at Toll Brothers. We're primarily a single-family builder developer here in the greater Puget Sound area. Build 380 homes a year to 400 homes a year. We're also a national builder public company, and we're looking at opportunities to bring more of our apartment side and mid-rise, high-rise part of our business here. So.
Hi, I'm Kristen Kane. I'm the Director of Development and Policy for the Housing Authority of Snohomish County. We own 44 properties totaling about 2,200 units scattered all throughout the county. We do own a property in Bothell. We also operate a 4,000 unit voucher program, Section 8 voucher program. And combined with Everett Housing Authority, which we actually have a joint jurisdiction, so Everett Housing Authority voucher holders also live in Snohomish County, and ours live in Everett. So between the two housing authorities, there's about 6,000 vouchers. And so we do all different types of development, but for rental housing and also manufactured homes.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jean-Paul Grenier. I'm the Vice President of Operations for our U.S. activities. I work for Woodbridge Northwest Communities up in Vancouver, BC. Here in King County, we have approximately 800 units of multifamily product, either in entitlement or construction or lease-up. And we began this market cycle financing regional developers, mostly in the single-family space, and moved over to the multifamily side of things about halfway through this cycle. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you very much for welcoming me on.
Good evening. Well, is it better? My name is Beth Dwyer. I'm a principal at GGLO. We are an integrated design firm located in Seattle and LA. And we've basically worked on about 25,000 units of housing in the past 30 years. We have a 30-year history of senior housing, multifamily housing, student housing, anything with a bed but a hospital and a prison, I guess we would say. But we do focus mostly on developing communities and just creating strong communities. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nikki Bailey, and I'm with Pinnacle Property Management. So we do management and the operations side of things. I oversee Six Oaks right across the way. Also another one locally, North Creek Heights, right behind the village. And then I oversee property between Everett and Tacoma as well. Thanks for having me.
I'm Arthur Sullivan with Arch.
And I'm Mike Stanger with Arch.
I'm Jean Zorns.
And I'm Jason Hampton.
Eric Clark.
David Fleet.
Roger Cecil.
I'm Dave Boyd with the City of Bothell Community Development Department. So I'm going to let Arthur kind of be the master of ceremonies and direct the discussion.
And I'm actually going to turn it to Mike for a moment to just sort of, if he's the one who's been contacting you and stuff, so I'm going to let him do some introductory comments. And like you say, we'll sort of have questions, but also commissioners will too. But we want to first give you a chance to make some opening comments. And so Mike's going to give a little context on it.
Right. I hope that I don't need to do much ceremony mastering, but I would like to remind the commissioners that we asked the panelists to think about a few questions that, you know, in kind of some mental preparation. They're familiar with the strategy list and your kind of general housing goals, objectives, the neighborhood vitality, choice and supply, affordability, special needs, seniors, and so forth. And so we asked them to think about what they would like you to know about how from their particular perspective, how those kinds of housing needs get met, what they would like you to know about particular interests or perspectives from their businesses, and how all these pieces kind of fit together behind the scenes, as it were. Those kinds of questions we thought might help prime the discussion, but of course we want you to ask whatever's on your mind, and we invite the panelists to fill in as they see is needed. And I'd just like to add my thanks. I'm very grateful that you're all here as well.
So we had said that we would ask them to become prepared to make introductory comments, so 5 to 10 minutes. And so a question I guess I have for the commission and for the panel, would you like to be able to complete your introductory comments before you get questions, or are you open as you're doing your presentation part for questions? And if you, David, if you have a perspective on, just so that they know when they're on that first part.
I guess this is a good time to open it up to extended comments for anybody on our expert panel who'd want to go further into the information that was requested from Arch prior to the meeting and be able to explain that before we kind of delve into our questions, and if that's okay.
Okay. All right.
And I guess, and with that, is there anybody in the expert panel who wants to go ahead and continue on with their introduction?
That's right. We didn't create an order here, and Fred looks like he's ready to go, so let's let Fred go.
Well, he kept looking at me, so maybe I was just first in line here, but I'm happy to do that. Housing Hope specializes in providing housing for the lowest income segments of our community. We typically have what we call mixed income projects, but for us, mixed income means a portion of the units are for homeless households, a portion are for households with 30% or less of median area income, and the remainder would be at 50% of area median income or less. In general, this segment of the population cannot be served by the private market. The private market is generally able to serve households with 50% or greater of median income, more or less, depending upon the community, depending upon your location. But that's it's extremely difficult for the private market to serve that 50% or less of area median income. So that is generally the realm of the housing authorities as well as the nonprofit world. The primary driver of the financing that for what we do comes from the State Housing Finance Commission. The 9% low-income housing tax credit product is the biggest source of funding. In general, that source will provide about 70% of the cost of creating housing that's serving these populations. And then there is a combination of State Housing Trust Fund, local support for nonprofits. We do fundraising that we bring to the table. We generally make contributions ourselves to the project. But that's the hardest part of the work, is putting together that remaining 30%. I think that if there's, looking down the list of things that you have on your list here under consideration, certainly waiver of impact fees or permit fees is huge. Housing Hope has created 3 projects in Monroe that were really directly driven by a ordinance that they have on their books that waive or greatly reduce impact fees for housing that is serving that 30% or homeless households. The way they put it on the books is they didn't want to leave it unlimited, so they said that we will waive these fees for up to this number of units. In that way, they could revisit it when the time came, when they reached that limit, and they could say, well, we want to extend this beyond what we said originally. But by putting that on the books, it attracted nonprofits like us to create this housing in Monroe. So in my view, it was very effective. There was a sense in past years that if municipalities waived local impact fees, that they had to substitute those fees out of the general fund to keep those funds whole. And that's not true, and that's not necessary, so that you can waive those funds and those impact fees do not need to be replaced with other funds. And if you have any questions on that, I'm happy to talk about that more. There's one other thing that is very, very common in the housing we develop, and that is the parking fees or parking requirement. For most of the projects, many of our households don't own cars. We choose to develop in locations that have access to public transportation for that reason. Surveys of our properties show that, I think the last survey was that we have on average 0.62 cars per unit in our projects. It's important to recognize that the funding that we use to create our projects provide that they will continue to serve this purpose generally for 50 years. So it's a long-term development. It's not like it's going to be serving this population for a short period of time and then converted into market rate housing, and then all of a sudden you don't have parking. So it's a very reasonable thing to do to reduce the parking requirements for these kinds of properties. So I will let someone else go next.
Can I ask a quick question first before we move on? Fred, what was the name of the project in Monroe that you're talking about?
Monroe Family Village was the most recent, and Woods Creek Village was the property prior to that, and Monroe Main Street Townhomes is the third.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I should have explained this maybe at the beginning. But I think I was just talking to Vice Chair Clark, and I think it might be a good chance for, as we're going through, and if anybody has any kind of maybe short, kind of brief questions, just kind of ask to each of the panelists. This might be a good time to do it. So, Commissioner Zorns?
Just a quick clarifying question. The developments that you were talking about are strictly to serve those, was it 3 different populations, homeless, 30%, and then the remainder?
And 50%.
It wasn't embedded with any other kind of housing, that was housing specifically dedicated to those 3 different populations?
That's correct.
Okay.
We do serve special need groups within that housing, but those are the income stratus.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for what you said. A quick question. Turn my mic on. Are you more local? Like for example, are you looking for opportunities in many different jurisdictions, or does it matter where regionally you are? Say, if you're in the Seattle area, or the East Side area, do you want to try to space your neighborhoods out? And if so, what do you see as being the need for that income segment in the city of Bothell? Is there a significant number of those people that you feel, or do you have a feel for that?
Honestly, I don't. I have not studied city of Bothell to be able to say. What we have done intentionally is we've created our housing where the need resides. We serve Snohomish County. Obviously, Everett is the county seat, and we are headquartered in Everett. We started in Everett, but we very quickly expanded into North County, and we've developed a dozen projects in North County, and then we moved to East County, and we've developed another 8 to 10 projects in East County. Our philosophy is that persons become homeless throughout the county, and they shouldn't need to relocate out of where they may have some support, however meager it may be. But particularly we serve households with children, and if those children can stay in their original schools, and we think that is best. So we do that. The other thing it does is that it helps, we view ourselves as helping local citizens to address their own need. So we do lots of community organizing. We form local advisory boards that help us to understand each municipality, because each municipality is different and has different needs. And we look to them for leadership in how we provide housing and where we provide it in their community.
Just one more follow-up question. When you say North County, East County, that's Snohomish County you're referring to?
Yes, okay. Yes. Okay. So north being Marysville, Arlington, Smoky Point, Stanwood, east being Snohomish, Monroe, Sultan.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
And just in case any of the panelists aren't aware of this, Bothell does straddle the county line, so it's unusual in the sense that we are in both Snohomish and King County.
I will add to that, is that our plan now, we are completing a what we call a regional center in North County for our projects there, and then we will be turning our attention to South County. So we are in the exploratory stages now, and we're getting to understand South County better, and formulating plans and doing community organizing to expand into South County.
You mentioned special needs in some of your projects. Could you expand a little bit on what that might include on a particular project?
Sure. It includes families with large households and that needs more than 2 bedrooms. So that is considered a special need. Special need can be households that have disabilities of various types. It could be we don't necessarily address severe mental illness, but certainly milder forms of mental illness is very common. Past histories of substance abuse is not unusual, although that is highly understood, and it's certainly not common in our projects as many think it would be. It could be. I'm trying to think of what other categories there are, but those are the most primary ones that we serve.
Great, thanks, Fred. And with that, we'll hand it over to Aaron Hollingberry.
Thank you. Right now we're seeing on the in market rate housing, we're seeing it across the board. We're seeing the price of housing is increasing rapidly, and we're seeing the cost of housing is going up to produce homes. We're seeing the cost of land is going up. A huge component of this right now is, as we see it, is a supply problem with not being able to bring enough housing to the market. And the jurisdictions right now are overloaded with the number of applications that are coming through, be it as your land use permits, building permits. The duration to get approvals is stretching out, both because of that overload and also regulations are continuing to get more difficult, not just at the city level, but I spent 3 or 4 hours of my day at a session with the Army Corps of Engineers and Department of Ecology, and those regulations don't sync with the city regulations, and it's creating a real challenge, especially as we're getting down to the last pieces of land inside the UGA, and they're not easy pieces of land. So it was good to go through the matrix that you guys have put together. I think there's some good opportunities there to concentrate on some places where, be it in regulations, there's some things that I think you can do there to loosen things up or to accelerate processes, not needlessly overprocess things with either, example is short plats. Here in the city, this is one of the few places that a short plat's limited to 4 lots. And so I had a 5-lot short plat that had to go through a full hearing with a hearing examiner, which is just kind of crazy these days. There's a lot.
Could you take one more sentence on that one? I just want to stay with that thought. So what are other cities doing?
Typically, you see it up at 9 for short plats, or state law allows you to go up. I believe it's up to 9 at this point, so that could easily go up. SEPA could be, I think that's on the list, but SEPA could be expanded so that it doesn't apply to as many projects. And it's with the regulations that we have in place now, it's a bit of an antiquated process for a lot of our projects that we've got out there. And there's also, introducing some more innovative housing types, i.e., cottage housing, that allows for, we're able to, City of Redmond, for example, has a cottage housing ordinance that will actually allow you to come in and where you could have a typical residential subdivision with larger homes, larger lots. They'll give you a density bonus if you go down to a 1,200 square foot home or a 1,500 square foot home. You get down to it, and it's graduated. The smaller the home, the bigger the bonus you get, so that you can provide more units. And I think you've got cottages on that list. So it was.
Again, just because you're here and you're an
Yeah.
expert on this and you're doing it, were there things that did Redmond do more than just say, that's it? Did they have to do other things to make that work? And other regulate, and other things we have to look. It's one thing to just say on the books that, but then if the rest of your land use code doesn't.
Mr. Sullivan, is your mic on?
Excuse me? So, do you understand what I'm asking? Is it more complicated? Do you have to look at more than just allowing that sort of sliding scale for unit sizes for
You
cottages?
need to get the scale right.
Okay.
So that you have the incentive to do it, because if you don't, it loses its value and you can't, it won't be used. And I don't think there have been a lot of cottage developments done in Redmond. And I think we're finally getting to the point where the price of housing is getting so high that it's starting to make sense. But you've got people moving into a 1,000 square foot house that costs $550,000. So that's while you've got needs at the affordable, the low income, 50-80% of median, you've got people having a hard time, with single incomes that are outside of that are having a hard time finding a place to live. And so there's some interesting things that you can do there with that.
So you do see more potential in that?
Yes.
Okay.
And interested in talking more about it as we go on tonight.
I'm quite interested in the cottage housing capability. Do you have the name of one of those that you all worked on, or was it just the concept you're interested in doing?
So I've got one that I'm working on right now that, but we're just getting into that. So I prefer not to talk about that one. But Conover Commons is one that was done, and that's 2004, 2005, and I think that was the last large cottage housing project that was done. At that same time, City of Kirkland had a innovative housing ordinance, and we did a Kirkland, what do we call it? A 15-unit cottage project in the city of Kirkland that was 1,500 square foot home, single car garage. And then we've got another project that is a larger subdivision, but we had 4 cottage homes that we did as part of that in Redmond at our Sequoia Glen project. And that was the 1,000 square foot example that I just provided. And actually, there were a total of 4 units. 2 were market rate, and they sold for around that $550,000. And then there were 2 that were actually affordable units that sold down at a lower, a rate. I don't remember the exact price we ended up at. Do you remember?
They're 80% of median. I want to say 250, 275,000, something like that.
Were the affordable units, were they attached or detached? Or?
They were detached.
Okay.
We walked through them the other day. They're nice.
Yeah, they're cute little houses.
What type of density are you looking at with those cottages, and what does Redmond have it dialed in at right now that makes it work for a developer?
So we're in the, I'd have to go through the calcs because I haven't done it, but we were able to get to take a 18-unit development and turn that into a 26-unit cottage project, and there was some affordable bonus in there. So that gives you a rough equation of where we're able to go, and that's for like an R4 zone, 4 units.
So Aaron, just maybe to clarify, and because you can probably clarify better than I, but I believe in most cases what they do is they say that you can either do more, you do it more by lots and lot sizes and lot count, and that you can, if you could have done 2 or 3, you can now do 4 or 5. So it's not so much a density calculation, is it, as much as it is sort of the lot configuration?
Well, so you do a density calc, the way
Okay.
Redmond's doing it right now is you do a density calc and you were able to get to 16, 18 units. And then you take that allowable density, and for each 1,000 square foot home that or cottage you provide, you get a 1.5 credit towards that 16. And if you do 1,200 square foot, I think it goes down to 1.3, and 15 goes down to 1.2, or it's a sliding scale like that.
And so the idea behind that is to create more market rate affordable housing for the 80-ish AMI?
Well, so it's not a low income affordable program.
Right.
Redmond does have a affordable requirement for certain types of developments, but it generally the cottage housing is it's not required to be affordable.
Right.
But what it does is it serves that single income market. It's able to hit, it's somewhere in between where you can hit middle class or you can hit lower middle class demographic.
Thanks. And did you say 1-car garage on those?
Some are 1-car garage where you're typically, the 15. What Redmond's doing is they're counting the garage in that 1,500 square foot limitation. So some of those, where we're 1,000 square feet, there's no attached garage. The garage is detached, or you're just having a parking stall, but it's 1 stall per unit.
Okay. Thank you.
And with that, we'll move on to Kristen Kane with the Housing Authority of Snohomish County.
Okay, thank you. So I think it was kind of nice actually to go in that order, to go from sort of the lowest income part of the spectrum, up to the higher ends of the spectrum. And I think from the Housing Authority's perspective, it's really important to us that we look at the whole housing continuum, and that's what we've, called it and referred to it as. So we don't work with the kind of market rate home ownership, but we have worked on affordable homeownership opportunities for folks in the past, and included in that is manufactured housing. We have a few projects in the city of Linwood and in unincorporated county near Mill Creek, where the homes, so the land is owned by the Housing Authority, and then the homes are owned by the folks that live there, and the homes are generally in the $100,000 range, so they're actually quite affordable. And the 2 of the parks or the communities are for people that are 55 and older. So it's just another affordable housing option for folks, that particularly it works well for seniors that just don't like apartment living, but they still need something that is really affordable. And it's, they can still be a homeowner, they can still be responsible for maintaining it. So what we do, housing authorities, we sort of deal with all the parts of the income spectrum other than the higher end. And so for Housing Authority state law, so this applies to both King County Housing Authority and Snohomish County Housing Authority, which work in the city of Bothell, any development that we do just has to serve, 50% of the units have to serve people below 80% of the area median income, which is actually quite high when you look at the breakdown of that by household size. And then 50% of the units can be market rate. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think a lot of people think that all that housing authorities do is, public housing and vouchers, and it serves 30% AMI, but we actually can serve a pretty wide range of income levels. And our apartment complex, Autumn Chase in Bothell, does serve sort of the higher end of that spectrum.
What was the name of that one?
Autumn Chase, and it's 120 units right off of Bothell Everett Highway to the north. So let's see, a couple things. Okay, did that. Housing authorities are also, so we have a couple things that make us unique in terms of affordable housing developers and owners. We own our housing, we operate it, we're a long-term owner. We rarely sell any housing, so once we acquire it or build it, we are the long-term owner, and because we're not-for-profit government entities, we tend to reinvest, the money either back into the complex, or we can use the money to do more affordable housing in the county. So I think in terms of, when you think about working with, housing authorities that might be doing a development in your jurisdiction, there's some additional reasons why you might want to do some different things than you would with like a typical developer, where you might, be okay with waiving the, mitigation fees or impact fees, or making the processes a little more streamlined. There are reasons why you have your process in place, and there's checks and balances, and you need to, check the box for certain things. But when you're dealing with an owner that is going to be there and going to comply, because we're in it kind of for the long haul, it's just something to think about. And I have an example of that I wanted to share. We're doing a renovation of a complex in a different jurisdiction that'll go unnamed. But this is a really small example, but just little things too. So at the end of this development, we're being required to put quite a substantial amount for us into an escrow account for a maintenance bond for the landscaping. And in Monroe, actually, we were able to come to agreement where we just have an agreement with the city that for the 2 years after the project was done, we would guarantee that if any of the landscaping failed, we would replace it. And the city was willing to, take our word on that. Well, this other jurisdiction is not doing that. And so we're having to take this chunk of our budget and put it into this escrow account, which probably won't need to be used. And that's money that we can't put into the project to renovate the units, at least for the next couple of years. And that causes complications with our financing. So little things like that even can help. I think, just to think a little bit, building on what others have said, land prices are going up drastically. Funding that's available for affordable housing is going down. I was looking at some statistics the other day, at least for countywide, and the amount of households that were moving to our county was double the amount of units that are being permitted, like on an annual basis. So it's like we continue to fall behind. And so for me, one of the things that stuck out at me is all of the strategies around allowing for increased density. Because again, when we look at this as a continuum, it also means that when people move into housing, say at the lower end of the continuum, eventually they might be able to move through and become homeowners. So they start out in a Housing Hope property and they might be homeless or they have a lot of challenges. Well, they work on things, they get a college degree, they're able to move into what we call workforce housing, which is a lot of what the Housing Authority does, where they don't have a rent subsidy, but their rent is affordable to them, so it's like a below market rent. Eventually, they're able to increase their income enough to be able to move into the private market and live in multifamily housing that private developers are building, and eventually they're able to buy homes. And so if we only focus strategies around one part of the continuum, it kind of creates this bottleneck. So to me, it's really important to encourage market rate rental housing as well, because a lot of folks that live in our workforce housing actually could afford market rate units, but the supply is so low that they don't move out. And so then they're sort of taking up this unit that really could be of more benefit to someone at the lower end of the income spectrum. So, strategies around density, and I think, that's, for some communities, they don't like it. They don't like, multifamily. They want to keep their single family neighborhoods. But I think for a lot of cities, they've been able to, rezone and increase densities in a lot of cases, sort of like as a buffer between the single family neighborhoods and these growing commercial areas that are really increasing density and adding businesses. So I think that's another strategy that's more palatable, and sort of like the step up, the single family to the duplex townhouse, to the 4-story, and then, 5 and up mixed use. And then, let's see, what else did I want to say? I think I've already mentioned manufactured housing. I think that's a really important strategy, but I also saw in there about the opportunity, like exploring opportunities for redevelopment while also addressing the homeowners' needs. And I think that's important too, because you get to a point where some of these properties are in really desirable areas where there's density happening around them. And so how do you, protect the current tenants or the current residents while also figuring out ways that over time maybe those properties could be redeveloped and you're still protecting the people that live there by either allowing them to have units in the new development or working with housing authorities or others that can help with relocating. I think from the voucher standpoint, one thing that really stuck out at me that we are seeing more of, I would say recently, and that is we have a lot of private market. So the way the voucher program works, just in case anyone's not familiar, is that it's a federal rental subsidy that comes from the federal government to the housing authorities. It pays the difference between the market rate, contract rent, and what the tenant paid rent is, and the tenant paid rent is equivalent to about 30% of the tenant's income. So someone could be paying $100 a month because their income is only $300. But then the landlord's still getting $1,500 because the subsidy pays the remaining $1,400. So it's a great program for utilizing the private market and allowing people sort of housing choice and mobility, the ability to live where they're working, where their kids are going to school, where there's opportunities for them. But one of the things that we've been seeing more recently is that a lot of private market landlords are starting to contact us saying that they're opting out of participation in the program. They're no longer accepting vouchers, which they have a right to do, unless a jurisdiction has a source of income discrimination law on the books, which many cities in the state do. None of the cities in Snohomish County do, and the Snohomish County government does not. And so basically what happens to folks, and you may have seen in the news, there was in the city of Renton, this made news in the last 6 months or so, Section 8 tenants were living in a private market development. The landlord decided not to participate in Section 8 anymore, and all the tenants were given a 30-day notice to vacate. And these are folks that already have challenges, and so then kind of putting them out on the street in often cases means they're becoming homeless, because even though they have that subsidy and they literally could afford a place to stay with the subsidy, but if no other landlord will rent to them, or they can't find something in 20 days, then they'll be out on the streets, and a lot of these folks have children. So having a source of income discrimination law basically requires landlords to not discriminate against them based on the sources of income that they're using to pay their rent. There isn't a state law on the books, which is why it happens a lot. So I think it's really important to look at, and I know there's some other cities in Snohomish County that are looking at potentially passing something. In the city of Renton, they did pass a 1-year temporary to address that issue. A couple other things, I saw some strategies around mixed use and TOD. I think that's great, and I think to whatever extent affordable housing can be incorporated into the areas where you expect mixed use and transit-oriented development to be happening. I think the challenge for affordable housing developers is because of our financing, it's really complicated to try to do mixed use, even though it's something that we support and we understand why communities want to do it, and it creates these vibrant neighborhoods. So also, I think, we would be interested in public-private partnerships around, developments where it could have a development where there are income-restricted units or rent-subsidized units for certain populations, like mixed in with market rate apartment units and office space and commercial. It's just more difficult for affordable housing developers to do that entire development on our own, plus we have funding constraints. And let's see, surplus public land is always big. Any affordable housing developers often have a hard time responding to available land for redevelopment, and we also want to do development in areas of opportunity, places where there's going to be transit and higher concentrations of jobs and other amenities. However, those are obviously the most desirable places to do development, and we're competing with private developers, which have vastly larger financial resources and kind of in-house architects and construction teams. And so sort of anything that cities can do as it relates to sort of the intergovernmental partnerships around any land that like housing authorities or nonprofits can kind of get in on the ground, and then even work with a private developer to add in components that the affordable housing developer can't, are important. I guess one last thing I'll say, well, building technologies was mentioned. I think thinking about modular housing, which is stackable and it can go up multi-stories. That's a new thing. There's some things in the news right now about some new products coming out that have been piloted, and I think that's really promising. Housing Hope actually used modular for something that's under development. We've done 2-story stackable, but that was years ago. And because we're always looking, as affordable housing developers, our cost to develop is much higher than private developers because of all of our all the rules and regulations that come along with public money at the county, city, state, and federal level. But our ability to take out debt is, we can't take out as much debt because our rental revenue is lower because of the income restrictions. And so we're working with higher costs, but lower revenues, so lower amounts of debt that are available to us. And so we're always looking for ways that we can cut costs, both if that is, mitigation fees, impact fees, but also the cost to construct. And so what types of products could we use to get that cost per unit down? Now it's at around $350,000 a unit for just a typical apartment. How can we get that down to 200 or 150 so that we could actually make some of these projects pencil? And then I think just, I sort of touched on it before, but I think what we call workforce housing, it's somewhat in the 30 to 50% range, but it's also, say, 50 to 60 or 50 to 80. When you hear low-income housing, you might not realize that means this is for people that are working full-time and that sometimes have two jobs. The average, or like the livable wage to be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment in the county right now is $18 an hour, and for a three-bedroom, it's $30 an hour. So we're talking about, when we say workforce housing, it's for people that are making an hourly wage that's less than that, which could be, paraeducators, it's, people working in retail, it's people working in preschools, it's, certain public employees, and like the folks that provide all the services to, your citizens. And so it's not, so the main program that we use to do housing for that income group is the 4% tax credit program, which is different than the 9% that Fred mentioned. So with 4% bond projects, you can serve higher income levels than the 9%. But now with the cost of construction, there's still a gap. And so I saw a strategy in there about, maybe local sources of funding or other regional strategies to help fund 4% bond projects. And that is a really good way to get at kind of the folks that work, but they don't make enough money to afford the new market rate housing that's coming online. That's a lot more expensive than what works for them. So I think I'll just stop there because I've probably taken up enough time. And if you have any questions.
Thank you. You mentioned, I heard you say, ask the question, how do we protect our tenants but redevelop those properties at the same time? And that you talked about that, I think, in the context of growth, and then all of a sudden a project that was in the middle of everything is, and potentially redeveloping that. Have you had experience with other jurisdictions and how they do that?
I haven't. I think there may be some. I think it's something that jurisdictions are probably starting to have to deal with now, that the market is just where it is. And like you said, a lot of these mobile home parks that were developed back in the 50s and 60s were rural, and now they're not, and they're in the middle of urban areas and town centers. And so to date, what we've done is preserved them as affordable home ownership. But we do recognize that long term, that isn't always necessarily going to be the appropriate use and the appropriate need in that part of the community. So yeah, I wish I had some examples of how that was done. I think, any program that would seek to address that issue is going to really want to protect the tenants that are living there. And so whether it is identifying maybe some other sites where they can, because the homes can be moved if they're in good enough condition, and if they're new enough, they can be transported because they're transported, to get there. And so are there other places where those can be moved that are more appropriate to maybe even what the resident wants? Maybe the resident wants a more rural situation, but they just don't know, where to move it to. Some of the homes are quite old. Even in the Linwood communities, we still have quite a few that are at 1960s, and they're really beyond the end of their useful lives, and it doesn't make sense to invest any money into them. And so we've been replacing them with brand new manufactured housing that's energy efficient, and it looks really nice. And if it wasn't in this type of a setting, you wouldn't even necessarily know that it was a mobile home or manufactured home. But so that, coupled with, if there's going to be a redevelopment, giving the current residents the opportunity to kind of have first crack at whether it's a condo that they can buy or an affordable apartment that they get to rent before anyone else has a chance to rent it, would be, I think, the main considerations.
One more quick question. You mentioned the Autumn Chase project I think it was Autumn Chase, but I thought you said that the housing authority owns the land, but the resident owns the building, is that correct?
Oh, so Autumn Chase is just a regular apartment complex that we own the whole thing, and then people just rent their apartments from us. But with the 3 manufactured housing communities that we own, we own the land, and then the homeowners, the residents own their homes.
So is there a reduced lease for the land, or is there no lease for the land in that situation?
Yeah, so they rent their space from us, and I don't know what the rents are at now, but when we acquired, they were at about $500 a month. So for some folks that own their homes outright, their housing cost was the $500 a month to us, plus utilities. And that covers, we pay for some of the utilities, and then we also maintain all of the common area spaces, so like landscaping, and then we do manage, we have leases with the tenants, and we have a program where we replace the home. So that $500 a month for all the spaces funds the management of the community. And then, if some folks do take out financing to acquire their homes, so they would have both the $500 a month space rental as well as like whatever monthly loan amount that they have to their lender.
Thank you.
Quick question, and I may be behind technology here, but I know the last time that I talked with city staff here is that we have mobile home parks that we're very protective of. In those mobile home parks are quite a few single wides that are quite old. How do you protect those? Are there modular homes that fit that same footprint? Or, how do you keep that vital is my question. Have you found a way to keep that vital?
Yeah, so the new products that are coming out do have an option that's that small. So if you just do sort of, and I've just looked at it online, so I don't know a lot about it, but they start out as small as like 160 square feet, and I think that equates to like 8 feet wide or 10 feet wide by, that appropriate length. So a similar, even actually smaller than the single wides were built at, because I think the standard single wide is like 10 feet wide by maybe 30 feet long, so 300 square feet. So yeah, and I think in some parks too, you could, like as there's turnover, you could consider consolidating and doing a double wide in a place where 2 singles were. But on the other hand, I don't know, I think there is a shift. Everyone's into the tiny house. There's a lot of people that really like the small spaces. They like having less to maintain. It's all over Sunset Magazine and, all these different places. So, and especially if it's a brand new product that's really nice and it's slick and it, fits in with the community. I think those smaller spaces really work well for, younger single folks and older folks that they don't want a lot of space to maintain and they're okay with having the small space. So, yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask a
Thanks,
follow-up
Kristen.
question on that one, if you don't mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
So are your mobile home properties, are they reserved for affordable housing, or they're just affordable by the nature of the type of housing they are?
Yeah, so they were both financed with public funding that has restrictions for what income levels can be served there. So there are restrictions on the total amount of rent, say, that can be charged for the space. And then we also have partnerships where we provide, through a lender, affordable financing for the home purchase. So yes, there are kind of a cap to the income levels of the folks that live there. It's only something that applies at move-in, and then people can have income progression after that. Okay. So yeah, it's usually when there's an affordability restriction, it's 2 things. It's you have to make under a certain income to be able to move in there, and the rent that you pay, so in this case, the space rent, plus your other expenses has to be something that is affordable, which is typically based on 30%, of someone's income at a specific level.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
So I think you answered some of my questions there. I guess what role do you guys take when you're doing replacement housing, that kind of thing? Are you helping homeowners finance the new units, or what do you see your role as in those
And that's
situations?
like as it relates to the manufactured housing
Yes,
communities?
yes.
Yeah, so we actually have a right, the two in Linwood, we have a right of first refusal. So when someone is ready to move out of the property, we will buy the home back, and then we'll determine if it needs to be replaced, which is typically if it's not HUD code, so it's older than 1974. And so if that's the case, then we pay to to remove the home, and then put the new home on. And then once that's done, then we secure a new buyer for the home, which they buy it directly from us and can
And if
finance
the owner, if the house is just at the end of its useful life, and the owner likes where they're at, is that another role that you guys play, as helping them find or finance a new structure on that pad?
Yeah, I think
Does
that
that
we
ever
had
happen?
that happen once where there was a current tenant that didn't want to move, but they wanted a new home. And so they had made arrangements for, we helped them replace their home, but then they were the ones that had to take out the financing to acquire it, and they made their own arrangements for living somewhere else while that was going on.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that sounds like that's not common. What's more common is
Yeah, once they're
somebody
ready to
either
move
moves
out.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's really the way that neighborhood would end up kind of revitalizing, is people moving out and new people moving in?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a long-term transition then?
Yeah, we purchased the two in Linwood in 2007, and I think we've replaced about 30 out of 93. So we actually did more than what we expected, but yeah, we were projecting it was going to take 15 to 20 years probably.
And what's your sense, so the people that are moving out, and you may not know this, but what's your sense, where are those people going? Are they moving up to larger homes, or are they moving out of the area, or do you have any sense for that?
So I would say at the 55 plus communities, they typically will stay there until they've either passed away or they need to move into assisted living. Sometimes they move because just change of circumstances and they need to relocate to a different place. With our Thomas Place community, which is in unincorporated near Mill Creek, that one doesn't have an age restriction on it, and so that is more of the case. It's folks moving in, this is their starter home, and so it's younger families or just families that have more limited incomes, and they move in and they actually are able to build up some equity. That's a different model. And then, typically they're moving out because they're able to move up to something more expensive that meets their needs better. Yeah.
So you brought up something kind of interesting about the redevelopment, the potential of redevelopment. I'm assuming as a housing authority, you guys aren't really in that game. Is that correct? Or would there be a situation where the land value pressure would be so high that it really made more sense for you guys to go through that process and try to redevelop and incorporate all your folks into a new?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it wasn't something that we thought we would be thinking about sort of anytime soon, but we are, our current communities, we don't see it happening anytime soon, but we are aware that at some point we may have to start planning for it, especially as the density increases. I mean, right now they're adjacent to single-family neighborhoods, so it isn't so much of an issue. But we actually do have another property that is really low density, and it's quite a big site, and it is basically at the 50-year, like at the end of its useful life. And so we are starting to plan for the potential redevelopment of that site, which will include relocation of quite a few households. So it isn't in our.
Increase in density would be the kicker there. It might make it worth it if you can get those people moved and then provide additional capacity for that similar.
Right. Yeah. Like in this particular case that I mentioned, it's sort of the combination of that increased density is appropriate on the site and kind of the infrastructure being at the end of its useful life and triggering us to do something about it. Yeah, so I think those two things, and I think too, based on the residents, I think with manufactured housing, people do age, and at some point, even though they really like having that house, it does make more sense for them to be in something that they don't have to maintain, like where they're living in an apartment and the property management company maintains everything and they don't have to worry about anything, or assisted living. And so if that was the case for a community too, if you had quite a few, more elderly residents where they were really at that point where they couldn't take care of the homes anymore, it would make sense and you could work with them. And I think the housing authorities, we could use our rental subsidy resources and in-house staff that have experience working with folks on moving, that could be partners in something that we own or in a different development where that needed to happen.
So I'm assuming you guys are all rental product. You don't have any. Do you have any customers that own their own units or own their own homes, or is it all rental?
Just the 3 manufactured housing communities where they don't own the land, but everything else is rental. Yeah, apartment rental. We have a few duplexes and 4 single-family homes in the town of Snohomish. But other than that, it's all apartments and mostly low-rise, like 2, 3-story buildings.
Thank you. Thanks for the information. That's really.
Great. And yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and move down to Jean-Paul Grenier from Woodbridge Northwest.
Thanks. Well, it's interesting. I'm just the fourth to talk, but there are already a couple of interesting threads that have emerged from the previous panelists already. One of them is the concept of housing continuum, and you described homelessness as not being a geographically constrained phenomenon. It happens across the county. It happens everywhere, and it needs to be. The solutions need to be distributed throughout time and space. And you described the same in terms of market rate housing sitting side by side with affordable housing, and I believe that to be true. And I believe that to be true because I think from a very high level 10,000 foot perspective, human population is going to continue to grow. It's certainly urbanizing. It's certainly moving towards coastal communities. It's certainly moving towards coastal communities with opportunities. It's certainly moving towards those coastal communities with opportunities in science, technology, engineering, and that's here. And Mr. Hollingberry, you pointed out that the urban growth boundaries have finally been met at this during this market cycle, which is the first time, I guess, since they had been reset several decades ago. So this is the moment to be talking about affordability, and I think I can't speak as eloquently about affordable housing specifically. I can't speak as eloquently about, let's say, urban planning, although it's very important to me personally in terms of the quality of communities that we build, and certainly the ones that we live in. But affordability and the supply side, which is where I come in, are kind of, in my mind, totally intertwined. And I may be building product for the 50% and over part of this conversation, but today's 50% and over, today's new apartment becomes tomorrow's slightly used apartment, becomes the next year's slightly more used apartment, which in reality, in a completely free market scenario, is affordable housing. And so I don't really have any specific agenda for what to discuss, but I would like to go through some of the highlights from the strategy matrix, if that's okay with you, from my perspective. One of them is that, and it may not be necessarily encapsulated in a specific item, but I would like to speak to, aside from personal or more optimistic values like social equality, sustainability, those are all very important to us. It's why we like building transit-oriented development. It's why we really love the MFTE program, for instance, because we believe in integrating different aspects of the spectrum in the same space, but also risk and risk management. I mean, as a private enterprise, that's what we're obsessed about. And from your perspective as commissioners, the question is, how do you encourage, at least from my, in terms of the 50% or over component, how do you encourage more of that in your community? We're all out there looking for opportunities every day. We're all making decisions on which jurisdictions to invest in, and we're all making decisions in terms of risk and how we can mitigate risk. We obviously have to take risk. That's part of our business model. But we're always looking for ways to understand that risk and make it understandable. So from my perspective, as you go through an affordable housing strategy and as you develop that process, I think the headline for me is keep it consistent, keep it transparent, provide clarity on the way through in the process, and make it as open as possible to private actors in this enterprise like myself, where we can understand the changes as they come, we can anticipate those changes. From our perspective, where we don't understand changes, we typically will not invest. Where we don't understand risk, we'll typically look for other areas to invest where there is not that risk. So from my perspective, and it's a personal belief, I don't believe that private enterprise and profit are, let's say, mutually exclusive to, government-led incentives, government-led affordable housing criteria that would be imposed on my business. But I do need to know it, I need to understand it, I need to anticipate it, and I need to be able to build that into my business model. Otherwise, we just won't make those investment decisions. And I feel like that's the best piece of advice I could possibly give the commission tonight. So as you go through this process, be transparent about it with members of my community so that we can anticipate it as we make our investment decisions and our long-term strategic planning, which is a big part of what we do. And if you do that, then we'll continue to want to invest in the community and we'll continue to want to make it work. And ultimately, you can always make it work. A lot of times, if there's a requirement that's new that, let's say, reduces my profitability, ultimately, it's going to change potentially the business decisions we make. It may just change the land price, and it may be that the landowner ends up, eating that cost. But as long as we understand it all the way through, we're going to continue to want to do business in the city of Bothell and to be, members of the business community, members of the community, and be proud of that. Why don't I just pick on MFTE to get started? I love MFTE. I think it's a win-win. And I think it's a win-win because it gives us an opportunity, at least as structured in Seattle, which is the jurisdiction in which I'm most familiar with the MFTE program. It's a win-win because we get to, take advantage of a long-term break on taxes, but provide instant, immediate, affordable housing for 60% or under AMI households, and we love that. We think that's just a total win. We demolished an 11-unit apartment building, and certainly tenant relocation was a hot topic. It was certainly low. It was certainly affordable. It was certainly not the kind of place where you'd want your son or daughter to live in. But as a result of demolishing that building, we're able to bring 70 MFTE units online. And so there was a loss of 11. There was a gain of 70. I love that program. I think it's awesome. So I encourage that. The only thing I would note is that in your matrix, it indicated allowing MFTE programs in certain aspects or certain areas of the city. And my question to the commission is simply, why limit it? Ultimately, if the MFTE program is voluntary and it's a win-win for everybody, then organizations like mine will make that decision based on the economics, and those tools are yours to manipulate, right? In terms of how you structure incentives for multifamily.
If I could just clarify that a little bit, because you can't just do it anywhere. It has to be multifamily and near mixed use and stuff. So I think we were alluding, and you're right, some cities very narrow and other cities much broader.
I was speaking geographically.
Right.
Yep. And I'm speaking geographically because I believe in distributing, as you pointed out, distributing across, both of you pointed out, across a continuum. So I'm a big believer in somebody who's earning $110,000 living next to somebody who's earning $30,000. I think that's good community. That's good neighbors. What else? I really liked the concept of moving to 5 stories of type 5 wood. I'm a wood construction kind of guy. Multifamily, the wood frame program is, safe, cost-effective, environmentally sustainable compared to other construction methods. We love it. In Vancouver, we're already doing 6 stories, so catch up. Let's do it. It's proven, and it's a great technology. The only thing I would say is make sure that your zoning codes are keeping up with your construction codes, or else you end up in a situation like Seattle where you have that 85-foot zone where you can build 85 feet, except that for all the other codes, you can only build 75 feet. So, 10 feet of zoning density across the whole city in 85-foot zones is totally wasted. I'm sure you deal with that all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
You're taking all my thunder.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay, I can use a little less talk on my side.
Okay. Let's see, what else? Laneway and carriage housing is totally not my wheelhouse. We don't build it, we don't do it, but it's all over my own backyard in Vancouver. And in any kind of large lot format where you're close in to services, close into transportation, it's worked. It works great in Vancouver. There was certainly concern at the beginning when it was implemented about privacy, concern about, windows being close to property lines and massing and shadowing and all that. That can be dealt with in terms of carefully reviewing envelopes. It can be dealt with in terms of carefully limiting sizes of these structures. But we've taken it to the step where either a subdivision or a stratification, bare land stratification, is involved. And so it can even be bought and sold as opposed to just being rental stock. It could also be at the owner's election, used to provide affordable home ownership in addition to affordable rental. So I like that. Condominiums completely encourage any jurisdiction to start lobbying their state government to try and end the nonsense on liability. All we build in Vancouver and in our outlying communities is condo. There's nothing but, and condo provides you so many more design alternatives than just a fee simple zero lot line shared wall kind of program that you have here. We have we're able to achieve greater density with less land and provide, let's say, 3-bedroom units where you would only get 2-bedroom unit townhomes by doing interlocking units, because in the condo world, there's no need to preserve a perfect true to the sky lot line. You can jig and jog and play with the lines on floor levels, et cetera. And of course, it's an incredibly affordable alternative to single-family home ownership. So I encourage that. Sub-area planning. Again, this touches on risk. There seems to be a couple of different ways to skin a cat. One is heavy-duty upfront work with the public to get the public on board on community planning, and then kind of draw the line on sand and be able to plant clear flags to the development community as to what's going to be possible and achievable, and not necessarily have as much, let's say, discretionary public comment after the fact. Have that public comment prior to and have it intensively, so that the public really gets its opportunity to understand and evaluate how their communities are going to evolve as growth happens. But then clearly define what it's going to look like for myself and my colleagues, such that we're again more prepared to make investments in the community and to bring that supply online. And that's something that, for instance, in my home neighborhood in Vancouver, which is Cambie Village, there must have been at least 6 intensive, not just open to the public conversations, but public workshops exploring options A through Z on how your neighborhood's going to look in 5 years. But then once that community plan was amended and done, that was it. And so exactly what can be built, exactly how it can be built. And there's far less, let's say, there's far less uncertainty in terms of the public process after that point. I don't know. I think that's kind of it. I probably used up most of my time. I think I'll probably draw the line there if you have any questions.
Mr. Zorns?
You're talking about, if I'm understanding you right, getting the public engaged on where a zoning is going before the zoning is set, so that when a project starts, people aren't
Yeah, and I think you've done a really great job of that. Imagine Bothell, or the downtown plan. And to be honest with you, we're just about to start another entitlement process in the downtown plan that we haven't done before, so it's going to be new for us. So I can't speak specifically to that, but generally speaking, looking to try and encapsulate public comment, public involvement, public engagement at an earlier process, let's say, than at the end when I'm coming close to applying for my permit.
Okay, so I have to tell you, here in Bothell, people usually don't notice what's happening until ground is breaking for it.
Right.
And Dave Boyd knows this. It's just the nature of busy lives for people,
Sure.
and how do you get things out there so people know about it? So I'm wondering, I don't know if you were hinting at it, but does Vancouver, or has Vancouver taken the discussion? Because we have, David, how many districts, little sub-area districts do we have here in Bothell?
Bothell has a total of 17 sub-areas.
That it's identified?
Yeah.
So would there be merit, if wishes were fishes or fishes were wishes, would there be merit in going to these sub-areas and purposefully trying to engage them one-on-one on discussions and treat those as, I don't know how we reel people in more in that discussion than we already are, except for go ahead and break ground and then see how people react to it. So are you saying Vancouver has smaller districts that they engage that kind of discussion? Or what would you suggest that is there a model that you know that works to get people involved in talking?
Right. So I'm not an expert on Vancouver's internal planning processes, but I'm sure it's something that I could probably pass on a couple of contacts at the city if you're interested. I don't believe it's patently different, probably, from the processes that you're going through. It may be about community involvement and how do you put those hooks in, as you say. From my perspective, I received like maybe 3 notifications before every meeting in my mailbox, so I had no excuse to not know about them. And they bring coffee and they bring donuts and pizza, and they have babysitting, daycare for the kids. They have daycare for the kids, so the kids can be over there while mom and dad are talking about the future of their neighborhood. I don't know. I'm sure there are a lot of opportunities for engagement. Yeah, sure.
How long did that process take with Cambie Village to get through that?
Well, this is phase 3 of a 3-phase process that has been probably 8 years in the making. Now, each phase unravels a new sort of sub area and enhances identifies the opportunity for new housing for new housing opportunities. They're more kind of like incremental steps in a housing plan, as opposed to maybe like a once every 15 years kind of thing. Yeah, this is a slow process. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a slow process for everybody.
And roughly how big is that district? Is that what you call it?
I would say only the 4 or 5 adjacent blocks down a light rail line for 20 city blocks.
Okay. And does the city, some jurisdictions around here have like neighborhood councils or review committees or that sort of thing? Or do they do that with citizens, that they bring a committee together that helps to run that process from the neighborhood side?
Yeah, I think that's a very that's a central part of the process that they go through, which is an open door invitation to join panels and to join discussion groups. And a lot of those discussion groups are breakout and come back together. And I certainly am not intending to, invite or impose a different way of doing things. My only comment really was intended to try and illustrate that the less uncertainty there is for private enterprise, the more likely it is to feel prepared to go in 100% and make those investments in the community and build that density, if that's what the community decides it wants.
Seems like it could be built in, or and I'm not saying we don't already do this, but maybe there's some things we could do better at the comp plan amendment level or the zoning level as we're gathering input, because we just went through an entire process of gathering community input, citizen input on some very specific comp plan amendments, and then some much more, so much bigger picture stuff. So seem that maybe there are some ideas we can take from that. I like the idea of the babysitting and that kind of thing. Anything you can do to
Absolutely.
to get,
like you say, people live busy
there.
lives. It's hard.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks.
Great. I think with that, we'll keep moving on down the line. Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. With Beth Dwyer from GGLO.
Well, I would say mostly everyone that have gone before me have talked a lot about development, and I come from a little bit of the different world of, they would technically be my clients, I guess. And so thinking about some of the challenges that we face as designers and when we're in the dirt and trying to figure out, we have a set of rules that we have to live by and create something beautiful out of that. And what does that look like, and what are our challenges? And I'd say from there's kind of two I'm going to address. One is the planning aspect of that, and the other one is process and entitlement. And I think a lot of our projects in this region do a really great job of planning. We look at a lot of the work that we've done over the past 20, 25 years, and we've really come a long way in looking at our communities and our smaller towns in general. Bothell, Burien, Juanita, Kirkland, Kenmore, all of them have really grown tremendously. And some of the things that I think that they did really well, including yourselves, is really thinking about how to create a strong downtown. So what does that look like? What does a strong community look like? And putting those pieces in place with infrastructure, understanding land assemblage, I think is a really important aspect of that, is making sure that if you're going to go after multifamily housing developers, you understand what does a piece of land that is actually developable look like. And because those are really important aspects. And creating those strong downtown cores take time, and they take investment on the community's part. But I'd also say that as you're starting to you're gathering information now about what your community really wants to look like, I think it's important to understand there needs to be some flexibility, because when we think about where we've come in the past 20 years from having no transit to all these great transit opportunities, and you all talked about transit-oriented development, and I think that's going to be really important for the city of Bothell to understand what does that look like to your downtown core, because that starts to play into so many factors in terms of mixed uses, less parking, walkability, livability, 24/7, experience in the downtown core for Bothell and all of these other regions, including Seattle. So that coordination, that future transit, I think is going to be really important. You talked a little bit about the zoning aspect and understanding, really cost-effective development. And I come from the world of mostly multifamily wood frame development. That's what I've focused on the past 20, 25 years in different regions. I'm working right now on the Junction across the street. And I've worked, Juanita Village was one of our early planning projects. Some of these you might know, you may not. Burien Town Square, the Spring District, which is in Bellevue. It's opening one of the first multifamily residents in the Spring District is opening any day, I hope. And then Issaquah Highlands. So some of these are all very similar to development, such as what's happening in the core of Bothell. And they all have incorporated, mostly all of them have incorporated a multifamily tax credit and or some sort of affordability into all the projects I work on. So I think having that mixed income is really important so you can create just a better community, a stronger community. When we also worked on a few Hope 6 projects over the past 20 years. High Point comes to mind, and then Greenbridge is the most recent one. Ceola Gardens is another one.
Excuse me, Beth, could you explain a little bit about what the Hope 6
Hope
project?
6 was, I am not an affordability housing expert, so it's not my.
So that's basically redevelopment of older public housing, relatively large. That might be at 500 units in the existing base. They might be 30 acres, and complete redevelopment of those. And they can be anywhere from more suburban type settings to more urban settings. So Yesler's Terrace is the most current one in downtown Seattle on the edge. Your community wouldn't have anything of that scale in it, but it's been where a lot of energy has gone. And redeveloping, not just with affordability, but then bringing in market rate to what was formerly all affordable.
Creating that mixed-use component, which the mixed-use income is what I'm talking about, and mixed-use, there's different uses. There's cottage, and then there's mid-rise, and in Yesler Terrace, there'll be some high-rise as well. So I think it's important to really look at that aspect, no matter what size, whether you're Yesler Terrace, whether you're 25 acres or you're 1 acre, I think it still can be applicable. It's scalable. And then having the zoning understand the IBC. I know I've talked with Bothell a lot about that, and it sounds like June 6th is coming up where you have some of the zoning requirements that you have don't necessarily marry up with IBC, and that's not that unusual in many jurisdictions. So from my perspective, as I start designing, it's important to understand what that looks like, and whether it's height, height of fire access. There's a lot of different technical aspects I won't get into, but it's really important to understand and marry them up so that you're only trying to meet one criteria, not six different criterias. And then in terms of process and entitlement, is understanding some of the challenges that developers have. And, energy codes in the Washington State are very restrictive and can be quite challenging. Waterproofing requirements in our region, especially this year, can be very challenging. Energy analysis and that criteria. And making sure that your entitlement process is streamlined to help those be as effective and move quickly as possible. Those were really just some, I think mostly, you touched on everything else that I would have touched upon in terms of development, but I'm really about design. So those are the planning and the process are really what's important from our perspective.
On the inconsistency between local codes and the IBC code, how much cost do you think you would associate with the unit? I know that's a big question, but is there a significant cost per unit to develop for your work and your time that you have to put into it versus if you could standardize something and build it from community to community?
Well, I think from my perspective, you would never take something and build it. You really want to understand the context of the community that you're in and be able to design to that community. So if it was important to have a mixed use in a downtown core, certainly that's, we would be looking at something like that versus there's lots of areas where you don't want to do retail. It's not going to be successful. You're going to end up with the nail shop in Teriyaki's place. And so really thinking about the context of what you're designing. There's some areas where it may be more realistic to have units at grade. But really thinking about what that means, instead of having retail, maybe you want to do, like City of Seattle allows you to do units at grade, but you have to be 4 feet above grade or 10 feet back to create that security and that front door feeling. So understanding that in different areas of your community, I think is important.
Let me add one thing on the permitting. It was mentioned earlier that we're doing a modular construction. It's a 50-unit project. The modular units were constructed in Idaho and then trucked to the site and then will be craned and set and stacked onto the site. But something we didn't anticipate and didn't really understand as we went into it is that state L&I approves the building. They are responsible for the building code, right?
Yep.
Not the city of Marysville.
Right.
But it was very, very difficult for the Marysville Building Department to step back from that and say, okay, well, that's your bailiwick and we're just dealing with the site. So I think it's a good thing to think about it in advance so that if you have that type of project that comes along, you will understand, what the line is between what the city is responsible for and what state L&I is responsible for.
I think that's a true statement for most jurisdictions, quite frankly. One of the other things I was thinking about also is really understanding the market. And whenever we start a project, we actually like to ask the developer to get us a market study because it's important to understand who you're designing for. And if you're designing for, 25-year-olds, that's going to look a little bit different than if you're designing for someone that's an empty nester versus someone with a family. So thinking about what kind of market you have here, is it 1 bedrooms? Is it 2 bedrooms? Is it 3 bedrooms? I mean, we don't do a lot of 3 bedrooms, but I think more and more you're going to find people that want to live in apartments. I mean, we're not in New York City yet, but there are generations of people that do want to continue to live in apartments and raise their children that way. And so thinking about what kind of flexibility you can bring and understanding the market for your city, I think is going to be important. Who wants to live here? And how can you help adapt your zoning and your entitlement process so that make it easier for whoever wants to develop that type of housing, whether it's cottage or mixed use or multifamily or. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And then we'll hand it over to our last expert here, Nikki Bailey with Pinnacle.
Hi there. So I actually don't really have much to say, but as an operator and a property manager, it's important for me to just be available and answer any questions that you guys might have, because once you get through your processes, we're then the ones who have to make that happen and operate the buildings and the homes based on what you guys decide today. So a few points that I'm definitely passionate about are obviously the transit-oriented development and kind of what that means long-term for the buildings. When you guys reduce the parking requirements, of course, we're the ones who have to retrain the residents of Bothell on what that means for them, the benefits of it long-term. But getting through that process can be difficult. And then I have a little bit of experience with MFTE and kind of what that means long-term. The only thing I would really advise is just to make sure that you are prepared to offer consistent and ongoing training, not just in the beginning when it's brought on, but throughout, to train people like me who are new to it within the last year. So that's never going to end. You're always going to need to kind of have that dedicated person. So like I said, short and sweet, that's all I have.
As the administrator of local programs, we totally understand what you're saying. In fact, we're thinking of making a video that we can just give to people.
Yeah.
Nikki, I was wondering if you kind of have a hands-on connection at Six Oaks with what's happening in our community in terms of demographics, who's moving in,
Yeah.
who's what sort of households, and I think there may be some misperceptions. I get a very small peek of it. I've talked to empty nesters who are downsizing and moving into
Right.
Six Oaks. I've talked to young professionals who are just moving out of their parents' homes and
Yep.
into Six Oaks. But can you give us a sense of who is living there?
Yeah, and it's really a variety of everyone. It's interesting. There's more families than I would have anticipated in the beginning. So a lot more, 18 and younger in the homes. And then not so many students. I oversee another building directly behind the village at Beardsley. And we have a lot more, maybe 20% of students over there, whereas Six Oaks is probably more like maybe 2 or 3% of students, so not as much. And pricing between those two buildings is relatively similar, but for some reason they don't end up housing here. So like I said, a fair amount of families, definitely a lot of single, maybe mid-20s to 35s or so, kind of techies type people. That's probably the bulk of it. I would say maybe 70% is single.
And could you, to sort of expand more on that, what do you hear from those residents about what they like about Bothell, or what they like about the building, or what they like about downtown? What kind of, or they don't like? What are you hearing? Is this sort of a new kind of lifestyle in
Right.
Bothell? And
What are they looking for in
right,
housing?
yeah, why did they move there? I mean, what kind of stories do you hear on that front?
I think that these new buildings in the downtown Bothell area are just exciting to people. This is an area you want to be in. It's central. It's close to Microsoft, so we have a lot of Microsoft, Google employees. But so I think it's just generally the area. And then, of course, since we're dealing with some newer construction, and we will be when Junction opens as well, but Pricing is relatively affordable when you compare us to, say, Kirkland or Bellevue, and of course Seattle. So Bothell's kind of the next stop on kind of where you would go. People may prefer to be in Bellevue. I don't know, but I think that when you compare our prices to Bothell, that's why a lot of people end up here.
And Nikki, so do you hear any questions with regards to? I know a lot of talk around town is with regards to parking, and I know we touched on it a bit earlier with regards to parking, but parking availability for tenants. Do you hear much feedback from tenants who say, we have people who want to come over and visit.
Right.
Where do they park? We have the new city hall with many parking stalls, but soon a lot of those will be taken up by some of the hotels. And then the Shag at the Safeway is now underway,
Right.
and that parking availability is no longer there. Are you hearing any concerns from people?
Oh, yes. As David knows, this is something we at Six Oaks have struggled with really since day one. The parking in the building isn't necessarily enough for the residents that are there. And then there's just limited availability around the building. So you have to, as a resident, either be willing to pay a high fee or fight for parking. Also, where that has really affected us, the on-street parking has affected our retail tenants. And that's been, I know, a disappointment to them, and it's been a big struggle for us as managers to kind of figure out what can we do. And there hasn't been, there's not much options for us right now. So right now we're kind of smooth sailing for the time being, but we anticipate it coming back soon enough.
So, I mean, in your opinion, would you say that the parking amount given to Six Oaks that was built in and approved was undersized for that particular complex? Or?
I understand the long-term plan, and once we get the transit and stuff and all of that happening, I think that it would be adequate. The problem is today we're not there, and so people still have one car for every unit. Maybe it's more like 1.2 because we do have a lot of two-person homes, and we have less than that of parking.
Okay, thanks.
A couple of quick things. You mentioned that they're stuck with going with a higher price parking. Where are they finding, where is that available?
In our garage.
Oh, in your garage, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it typically everyone tries, and we're very open with, if you choose not to have parking, here's what you're gonna run into. And then so they say, well, we're not gonna add parking. So they rent at the rate that they get, and then they find out, I do need to add parking, and now that puts them maybe a little bit above where they could have afforded initially.
Is the parking garage fully occupied?
It's
now?
near occupied,
Near
yeah.
occupied?
So depending on our occupancy where we're at, like right now we're at 94 or 95-ish. We might have a few spots when we're more full. Our parking, we've been down to 1 or 2 spots only available.
Do you do assigned parking, or is it just sort of
We have a
by time
mixture of
management?
all different types. So we do have reserve parking, and then there's some flex programs.
You mentioned families living there. What is the mix of single, 2, and 3 bedroom units there? Are there a significant number of 3 bedrooms?
We don't have any 3 bedrooms.
None?
Nope.
Okay.
We cap at 2, and we have studios to 2. We probably are heaviest in the 1 bedrooms and kind of the urban 1 bedrooms, and then the least on the 2 bedrooms. I don't know the exact count, but I'd say maybe we have like 50 to 60 2 bedrooms, and then probably over 100 1 bedrooms, and then a smaller percentage of studios.
And do you find, are some of those families multiple children?
Yep.
They are? Mm-hmm. 3, I mean, bigger families?
I'm sure there is. I haven't seen 3. I've seen 2, and then a lot of 1s. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I was wondering if, We almost should have invited you to do something that cities do in hearings sometimes when there's a big crowd. And if you agree with what somebody's saying, other people all raise their hands like this, and we didn't ask you to do that. But you've all been very patient in listening to each one of you speak. And I'm just wondering if there's any of the points you heard from others, either a wrinkle on the point you heard or a point that you think is so important for us to have heard that you want to take, this is sort of more of the lightning round kind of question, that you would want to make sure you have a chance to echo to make sure we really get it. So let's start at that end and just sort of give you a chance to take like a minute or so to respond to things you heard that you want to emphasize or add a wrinkle to.
Okay, thank you, Art. I think that you've heard lots of really great comments here from some very knowledgeable speakers, so I've enjoyed listening. I think that the thing I would really emphasize is that, I talked before that we deal with homeless population, and there's a huge misconception out there of what the cause of homelessness is. The state of Washington released a study in January, and they went through and they attempted to correlate the rise in homelessness with a lot of other factors that people oftentimes think of causing homelessness, whether it's mental illness or substance abuse or household formation, divorce rates, numbers of children, just a whole bunch of stuff, job growth. There's no correlation with any of that with the rise of homelessness. Where the correlation is very, very clear, and that is the rise in the cost of housing, number one. And number two, the lowest income members of our community, their incomes are not rising at all. Yes, Microsoft and Amazon, Google, those employees, their incomes are skyrocketing. And you average that all in, and it looks like personal incomes are going up at a very nice rate. Everything looks great. But if you separate out the lower income members of our community, over the last 10, 15 years, it is absolutely flat. So the market is running away from them. At one point in time, they were able to keep up. They can no longer keep up. And homelessness is skyrocketing since 2011. And I think that what was said here is really true. It is largely a supply and demand problem. The population is moving here. We have a tremendous in-migration that is not going to stop. And the best thing we can do to bring the cost of housing under control on a macro level is to develop more housing. It's an imperative. And if we don't do that, our communities are going to suffer greatly.
Okay.
So there were two comments that Mr. Grenier had made that I wanted to touch on. And one is the condo question and the condo concern. And this one's kind of granular here in the city. So I've got a 45-unit townhome that we're about ready to break ground on here in downtown, and sat down with staff to try and implement the Offspring subdivision and apply that to this project. And that code needs some work. It is not, it would allow us, if it wasn't quite as tight as it is, it would allow us to actually take that project and turn it into fee simple lots that could be sold outside of the condominium process. It has just a limited amount of modification that it allows to, it only allows you to, I think, modify the side yard setbacks and rear yard setbacks. And when you get into a townhouse situation where you've got 3 or 4 townhouses, you start having problems with impervious coverage. And so if you could take, City of Redmond has a unit lot subdivision ordinance that basically says if the parent lot, which is trying to do the same thing, if the parent lot meets the zoning code, then we don't care how you slice it, the underlying lots will be acceptable. And so you just have to make sure you maintain that anything you do on the lot meets the parent lot. And so I highly recommend that you take a look at that code or have staff take a look at that code. And you can make some real simple adjustments there to make that something that can be used. I don't think that's been used a lot to date.
No, not to date, and we're also realizing that as it comes up on, especially on these townhome projects, it was the initial impetus was detached condominium projects and creating fee simple lots. So we are realizing some difficulties and also that there are other ways to achieve that through binding site plan maybe is one that we're exploring. So but we need to get a better understanding of what the implications of those different options are.
I've been down the binding site plan route and would love to talk to you about that. It doesn't give you quite as much latitude as you'd hope it would. But open to talk about that. And then the other point was predictability. And that's been my mantra when I'm talking to jurisdictions about just about any kind of change that's coming. When it comes to impact fees, have no problem paying for having good schools, having working on traffic issues. No problem with paying those. It's just it kills the development community if you make those changes quickly. The change in the school impact fee going from $0 to $10,000. Luckily, you guys took the city took a little bit of a graduated approach to that, but it's coming on very quickly. And with the time it takes to work through projects and the way you vest for impact fees, we've got a number of projects that are getting hit very hard, and it hurts tremendously. If you can grandfather in existing developments when you're making significant changes, such as if you start introducing some affordable requirements, you'll get a much better reception from the development community if it's going to be a delayed or a phased in process. So, but that predictability is huge. Thank you.
I think just 2 points that I wanted to reiterate. One was the concept of the mixed income properties and mixed income neighborhoods. So it's kind of separate from mixed use, but so strategies that help incentivize developments that serve a range of income levels, because ultimately that, from an operations standpoint, that's the most financially viable as well. And the way sort of things are set up right now, both in terms of a lot of cities and in terms of the funding sources, is that it's really easy to do one or the other. It's really easy to build an affordable housing development that's highly, income restricted, deep income subsidy, and you're concentrating a lot of challenging people with, high poverty in one place. It's pretty easy to build, or kind of to do the market rate development standard, everything's higher end. But I think really strategies that can help promote that truly mixed income community where you have people of a range of incomes living together that are mixing and socializing, because it does also help the lower income folks get connected to the job market. And then also just reiterating the importance of providing for lots of housing types. And I'm sure you've heard this in a lot of the public comments too, but I recently purchased a home. I actually was looking in Bothell and would have bought something here if something came available, but ended up buying in Lake Forest Park. And the folks that sold our home to us were 70 years old. They lived in their home for 50 years. They were the first owners, but they were not able to, they didn't have a housing option that they could move to when they were ready to give up the single family home, and they ended up moving to Kenmore. And I was just thinking about how, Lake Forest Park is really small, and there's not as much opportunity to create more of different housing types. But, you know, I'm not always going to want to live in a single family home. I love it right now because I have kids and a dog. But when, you know, my mother ages, I might want an ADU or a cot or something in the back that she could live in. And then when I'm old and don't want to need a single family home, I will want to live in an apartment or a condo. But I won't be able to do that in Lake Forest Park unless they change their zoning to allow more density. And then when my children get older, if they want to live here or live in Bothell and go to Bothell, are there going to be apartments that are affordable to them while they're students? And so just thinking about the range of housing types that everyone in a community wants, and just because a community has been primarily built with single-family homes doesn't mean that's what people are going to want long-term as their needs change over time throughout their life. So.
Can I just ask about you mentioned mixed income properties and neighborhoods. Can you talk at all about the value of having mixed income in an individual project as opposed to having it in the neighborhood, or does it matter as long as you get it in the neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean, I think it works both ways. I think it's more valuable if it's mixed income within the same property because you actually might have more kind of socializing happening between the residents. And I think just from an owner-operator standpoint, it's more viable. Like if you're trying to serve folks at those lower income levels, if you can also be housing folks at the higher income levels that are able to pay higher rent, then overall, you know, you can kind of spread out your, you know, you can kind of net out your revenue. And so in effect, like the higher income folks are kind of subsidizing the lower income folks. But overall, you're able to get enough revenue to operate the property. And then you're not concentrating within a particular property also. The extremely low income levels. But I do think too, if that can't happen, I mean, it's also important just within a neighborhood that you could have those different options there. Because just like higher income people want to live in a vibrant neighborhood with transit opportunities and commercial and retail, so do low income people. And in some ways, it's even better for them because especially if they don't have cars, like they really do need to live where there's lots of transit options and a lot of job opportunities. And so, you know, yeah, even within the same neighborhood, I think it's really valuable, even if it's not within the same property.
You know, I don't have too much more to add. I've appreciated all the comments from my fellow panelists, so I'll probably just pass that time along down to Ms. Dwyer here.
I think I would probably reiterate the multifamily tax exemption, and because I think it's a win-win. It incentivizes developers to come and develop in Bothell, as well as it provides that mixed income within a project. It seems like a win-win to me, and I see so many other jurisdictions that use it, and it's working. So that's about the only piece I would add.
Can I ask a quick question about that? Of all the jurisdictions you work with, what would you say that the vast majority, the majority, or half use MFTEs? What would you say that is?
Some use it different than others. I know that Burien has done that, and Bellevue does it a little bit different. Trying to think who else does it.
But more and more jurisdictions are making
Kenmore,
that
but
available.
Redmond does not.
We can give you information at a subsequent meeting on that.
Okay,
We're pretty familiar.
great.
Kirkland does it, yeah. I can't remember who does and who doesn't. But that's good. Thank you.
Just quickly regarding the MFTE program, obviously representing the landlords, they love it. They love the incentives and everything. From an operating standpoint, we are the ones actually who certify those residents. Initially, I only have experience in Seattle, and it's relatively new. But initially, the city and our contact person, the application process is done through us and them. But ongoing, they don't have much involvement. And so we still have to recertify them each year upon renewal. So it's being done. Where my feedback comes in is just we definitely see like workarounds around the program, and I unfortunately don't know what a lot of those are, but requiring the income requirements, for instance, we have a lot of servers and stuff who don't necessarily, the income proof that we require doesn't maybe show all of their income. So where maybe one person would be a great candidate for this program, we are filling it with people who might make a little more money than we actually physically see. So I don't know. I don't know what my suggestion is. It's just a comment I felt I needed to make.
Appreciate you wanting.
I think what we've seen.
Appreciate you wanting
is
to
a-
serve those most needed. So
Yeah,
appreciate you.
other jurisdictions have provided someone who actually does that as part of, that's their job, is to help who's ever running the property management group do that part of it, so that it's, because there tends to be leasing turnover, it's not always the
Right.
same people, and so to have one consistent person that potentially works for the jurisdiction
Yeah.
is something that we've
City
seen.
of Seattle has a great program for that. They have something like 6 training classes a month that me and my whole team have actually been to in the last 60 days. What I think I'm more talking about is there should be some connection between the resident, the participant in the program, and the city, not just that first touch. So they should maybe be required to fill out an annual questionnaire or something that kind of explains their current situation that maybe we as property managers wouldn't really have the experience to review that.
We'll need your card and we'll talk more with you.
Okay.
It's 7:59. So I don't know if you guys have a few more questions. I think we told the group it was 2 hours. But I don't know if you, I just wanted to make sure we gave them all a chance to respond to their introductory comments, so.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for your second round there. I've certainly, my head is just spinning with ideas. It's really great to have you all before us. I think I will, allow the, commissioners if they have some follow-up questions, and then we'll maybe just go couple minutes over if that's okay, because it's kind of rare that we get you all here in one place. We really appreciate your coming out tonight. So, Commissioner Cecil, you.
Yeah, thank you all for your comments and your input and your expertise. What we're considering in Bothell in terms of affordable housing generally is more kind of sprinkling it through our new developments as either maybe an incentive based or whatever, where a certain percentage of your units, either we haven't decided yet whether it's mandatory in certain places or incentive based or whatever, but generally the idea is we're taking projects and saying, hey, 5, 10, 15% of that project needs to be affordable, which kind of speaks a little bit to what you guys are suggesting. That code, though, really relates to, the private developers. And so my question is, so those aren't affordable projects necessarily, like you guys do. And so my question is, are there either cities or counties who have done a really good job at attracting your projects, or are there specific overlays or codes or incentives, something that draws you as a large-scale project to a city? I mean, you said predictability, there's some things that I've heard, but can you think of specific things that a reason why you went to X city instead of Y city? And because that's one of the things, we're looking at it, on a really limited scope, right? All we're doing is zoning, and so, but we're also supposed to be looking at housing strategies. Affordability is one of those, but, affordable projects, I don't know, obviously we have a few in town here, but how could we as a city attract someone, a project like that? Besides being predictable.
Yes, yeah, I got that. I think that what the City of Seattle is doing is interesting. They have on their books that you can achieve increased density by providing affordable units within that project, or you can pay a fee to essentially fund those affordable units elsewhere. So what that does is it gives the City of Seattle an increased pool of funds that they can use to help support affordable development projects that would be developed by a housing authority or a nonprofit that specializes in that kind of work. One of the things that a private developer can't do is they can't deliver services to those units. And depending on who's being served, oftentimes services are really necessary for that household to learn to function at a level that's really going to work within that community. And that is why oftentimes affordable housing developments or projects that serve homeless households with less than 30% of area median income, they're intensive projects with intensive services, and that's best delivered within a project as opposed to being scattered over the city in a variety of locations.
Yeah, and then, I would just add, because I love the idea of the multifamily tax exemption. I think it's great to have a way for private developers to bring that component in, but that doesn't benefit us at all because we already get the tax exemption via us as a governmental entity or via the funding sources we use. So, I really like the idea of it's an either you integrate it into your property or you can pay into a fund so then you meet that requirement or get the incentive, and then that money could be used to be given to a nonprofit developer like Housing Hope or the Housing Authority to integrate into our project. I also saw in here there were some things about like the city using credit enhancing bonds. So for instance, we've done that before with the Snohomish County. They've given us contingent loan agreements. We're a bond issuer, and then they use their bond rating to give us a contingent loan agreement on the debt so that we can get the benefit of the credit, the credit enhancement and get even lower interest rates than we already get through the tax exempt status of the bonds. So I don't know if that's something the city's considering, but that's huge. It saves a lot of money for these projects. And then I saw something else about like what was it called? A regional investment strategy. Where did I write that? A regional housing financing strategy. So I don't know what that is, but other ways that the city can kind of participate, like in Arch, participating in Arch, contributions from the general fund, other ways that you could actually be a funder or assist in the financing of the projects would really be helpful. And I don't know if this has been done, but I haven't really done public-private partnerships, but if a private developer is coming in and doing a big development, and it's mostly going to be market rate, but if there's through a city incentive or some kind of arrangement, they could do a condominium of a certain number of units within that project that then could be owned by an affordable housing owner to lease to deeper subsidized, tenants, deeper income restricted tenants. That could be a way to kind of increase the spectrum of affordable of the different types of affordability within a project. I don't really know if that's been done or if the private developers can speak to that, but just I've heard an example of a project where it was a podium development with multi-story wood frame construction, and the private developer owned the commercial podium, and like one building was market rate, and then the other building was a condominium that was owned by affordable. So I think it's kind of done. I don't know if it's like within a story of a building or something.
That was the South Kirkland parking right you just described.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, things like that.
Really, it's good information. We're I think as a commission, we're in this position where we're told to look at code, our zoning code, and then they plop this big, huge, monstrous problem on us, of affordable housing, and so I think all of us are just kind of shaking our head, going, okay, what, so there's like David said, we're all kind of thoughts are swirling around in our head, but I think we have limited scope to what we can actually do, but if there's anything we can glean to get our code in a really, oriented towards this, that's, I think, a big part of this, so.
Yeah, thank you very much. This has been incredibly valuable to me, just to have all of this insight. And I'm, as I sit here scribbling madly, I'm gonna have to go back through these notes and try to make sense of it. And I've been trying to do that as we try to organize it into themes or something like that. And I'm hoping that this thing's being recorded, right, Dave?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so hopefully we can get a kind of a condensation of into several themes. And I took a shot. I was just kind of thinking through, okay, how many of you, how many issues were there that two or more of you thought were important? And I've got a list here. It could be half of this, it could be double this, but I heard things like obviously mixed income communities are good. I heard that, and that was that's a stirring thing to me. Flexibility in processes and timelines and that sort of thing, and streamlining of processes. The MFTE thing that came up over and over again, and I think about it often too, because I work with different jurisdictions as well. The kind of the consistency between the IBC and local codes, I had never really, it's occurred to me, but I've never really thought, okay, we really need to do something about this, because it's kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face a little bit, and with that. JP and a couple other people mentioned risk mitigation and management. That's a huge deal. The condo issue and condo law reform is one that I think everybody needs to get together on that. The housing industry, everybody, the design industry, the jurisdictions, and then predictability came up over and over again. So those are kind of what I gleaned out of this. That's a vast simplification. I'm hoping that, I think our task as a commission and staff is to take that and distill it and try to get some things that we can work from. But this is a fantastic start. I really appreciate that. And I would love if we had the opportunity, and if it's appropriate, Dave, for us to be able to contact each of you if we have questions that might come up. Can you distribute?
Yeah, we can talk about how best to do that, whether we should channel it or just put everybody in touch with everybody else. But I think it might be good to channel it so that everybody gets the same,
Yeah.
the same
I was
information
just
back.
thinking if there were certain things that we wanted to clarify or had a specific interest or something, and it'd be nice to have that ongoing contact. Maybe we could invite all of you back at some point. So thank you very much.
I was just going to say, if we have childcare and bring donuts, would that work?
I want to share my fellow commissioners' appreciation for you being here, and we really appreciate it. And Commissioner Cecil, he described the big problem that's been dropped on us. And I don't really see us as the problem solvers. You guys are the ones that are creating the supply. You're the problem solvers, and we're here to, listen to the community and what they want, and also listen to what you need to make this problem easier to solve. And so we really appreciate you sharing your perspectives on this. And we need to figure out how we get the Canadian condo movement going down here. So be in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you all again for being here. I have other questions, but just in being the time it is, I think I'll kind of just hold those for future time, or maybe follow up with Dave to send to you all. But Arthur, did you have anything more to add this evening?
I think it was a great conversation, so I hope you feel the same way.
Yeah, it was a great conversation.
I appreciate everybody.
Yeah, and I think all the commissioners do, and braving the traffic to get here at 6 p.m. is no small feat. So Dave, I guess Art, that's a question. What? Okay. Oh, great. It's good to have an audience always. Let's see. And with that, I guess, I don't think we need to go through the rest of the details with the old business reports from staff or members. Anybody have any of those?
The only thing I want to note is that tentatively we will have our next continuation of this study session, or potentially even public hearing on May 17th. We will confirm that very shortly, and we'll confirm it for the Imagine notice, which needs to go out at the end of this week. But also just to let you know, you do have a very full May coming up, partly because the hearing on the clustering had to be continued into May. So you will have there are four meetings scheduled in May and 5 different topics. So
it's a full
good
month,
luck.
Dave. Good luck for you. And adjourn this study session. Thank you again so much for your input and for being here. Thank you.
Thanks.